I'm pretty sure we lend to more people every day in India than any other company, I think, in history.
That's Matt Flannery, and he's the founder and CEO of Branch International. He's also the founder of Kiva, a microfinance pioneer that was one of the darlings of the Web 2.0 era. It's skyrocketed from a small project into a worldwide nonprofit that Oprah and President Clinton love talking about. With Kiva and now with Branch, Matt is lending small amounts of money to people who are typically left out.
In the US, we take it for granted that nearly everybody can have a debit card, nearly everybody can have a credit card and access to a small amount of credit. Whereas Kenya or Nigeria, there is no such thing as a bank that will lend to you.
On this episode of Crafted, we learn how Branch uses data from people's phones to confidently make loans to people who don't have traditional credit scores, plus how they prevent fraud and avoid bias.
You have to serve people randomly with no judgment, and you have to learn from that group. We probably make hundreds of loans every day to people we know nothing about.
We'll also explore the wild ways that Branch is experimenting with generative AI.
Lending is essentially about predicting the future. And based on the past, you can ask generative AI to predict the future. We call that future synthetic data.
Plus, Matt shares how playing in a rock band in grad school helped him become a better CEO.
I had to perform in random clubs. I had to tell jokes. Our band was trying to be funny, trying to be stupid. And then a few years later, I found myself having to be a public speaker.
Welcome to Crafted, a show about great products and the people who make them. I'm Dan Blumberg. I'm a product and growth leader, and on Crafted, I'm here to bring you stories of founders, makers, and innovators that reveal how they build game-changing products and how you can too. Crafted is brought to you in partnership with Docker, which helps developers build, share, run, and verify applications anywhere without environment confirmation or management. More than 20 million developers worldwide use Docker's suite of development tools, services, and automations to accelerate the delivery of secure applications. Learn more at docker.com. And Crafted is produced by Modern Product Minds, where my team and I can help you take a new product from 0 to 1 and beyond. We specialize in early-stage product discovery, growth, and experimentation. Learn more and sign up for the Crafted newsletter at modernproductminds.com. I
traveled across East Africa and tried to volunteer at microfinance institutions. I had heard about microfinance, the practice of giving small loans to low-income people to help with their business. And that was fascinating. And I was with my friend at the time, and we just volunteered at a church in rural Uganda. And so when I was out there, being the software developer that I was, decided to build Kiva. The idea was, why can't you just lend to these people over the internet? Here we're lending to a guy that has a pharmacy. He needs medicine, a box of medicine to distribute to his village. It's $50. We're lending him $50 and he can repay that. But what if you could do this at scale across the world, raise money on the internet, and instead of, sponsoring a child, you sponsor a business. So that was the initial eureka moment.
And I remember reading some of those stories on Kiva and giving money. It was an amazing thing to do, to be able to read these stories and help someone buy a freezer. What were the things that you learned from Kiva that informed how you went on to launch Branch, which is not a nonprofit, it's a for-profit bank?
Yeah. Well, I learned so much. I was the CEO there for 10 years, so it's hard to sum it up. But I think the first thing was, wow, there's a lot of interest in this. I did this as a side project. I had 7 businesses on my personal website. And then one day, we got tweeted by the biggest blog in the world. So pretty soon Bill and Hillary Clinton started talking about this. And so I was just shocked by this little side project that I was doing over the summer became, this worldwide known brand. So catching up to that was the first thing. Also just, it's really hard to connect the dots between the capital markets in the US and a place like rural Uganda, and all the intermediary points, legal restrictions, regulatory issues, currency issues that come in between. Making that connection is really hard. So I feel like, I basically just set my life's goal towards, in terms of work at least, in terms of connecting those dots. And I'm still really trying to do that.
For folks who are listening in the United States and whose only experience is banking in the United States, is there something that you wish that they knew about the experiences that some of your users are having, and why, an app like Branch is so necessary?
The main thing is, where we work, maybe only 50, 60% of the people in the country have access to a bank account. It's really not easy to serve somebody that makes $2 a day or $5 a day. It's not profitable, at least in the old-fashioned brick and mortar structure. So in the US, we take it for granted that nearly everybody can have a debit card, nearly everybody can have a savings account, and even a credit card and access to a small amount of credit. And you think about times when you've been in trouble, you can't pay the bills at the end of the month. I've been in that situation, especially when I was starting Kiva, where I was like taking payday loans and everything. At least you have that financial backstop, whereas in country like Kenya or Nigeria, you have to rely on friends and family because there is no such thing as a bank that will lend to you. And then in comes microfinance with brick and mortar branches that visit people in their village, which is an amazing, amazing thing. And that's what got me started in this business. Now I'm just trying to do that on a digital level.
So tell us, what's the vision for Branch?
Yeah, so in 2015, we started Branch. The idea was to create a full-service digital bank for the mobile generation in emerging markets. So basically, one by one, we're incorporating in different countries, mostly in Africa, forming these little banks and making it purely digital over Android, giving small loans and allowing people to save money and invest.
And I'd love to zoom out just like the really, really big picture here of like, what is the impact of giving credit to these people who have traditionally been left out?
They can get ahead in their business. That's the main thing. So you have these economies which are fairly isolated from the global economy, and banks don't serve them because it's too expensive or too risky. A lot of times governments really regulate banks, and they basically outlaw banks. And it's not because banks are bad. It's just they're so regulated. They have to be so risk averse. They can't try stuff like this. And so, for instance, governments, emerging markets around the world are pretty much banning that banks do this kind of work and serve these kind of customers because they see it as quote unquote subprime. But if you're able to serve subprime folks at scale, tens of thousands every day for years at a time, maybe it's not as risky as they thought. So part of this is trying to prove to banks that this whole slice of the population is creditworthy. It's just that they're not documented.
Yeah.
And that's going to take a long time because although banks might like it, regulators are worried about it because it could present, systemic risk to the banking system. So I think companies like ours are sort of at the front lines of taking all these risks and trying out things. And if we stick around, maybe banks will do it too.
So how are you able to do this then if regulators are so wary and it's been traditionally so difficult? I'm curious how you were able to get your foot in the door in the African countries where you started.
I had a wanderlust, travel lust since I was really young. So I like going to these places myself and really figuring out how to connect to the financial system, how to register my company, how to fight through the regulatory forest. So I think one thing we did early on is I was really early to start a company like this. I think we're one of maybe just 2 or 3 in the world that were trying stuff like this. And I was able, luckily, to raise a lot of money from VCs in Silicon Valley. That was sort of a bubble time, if you remember 2017, 18, 19.
I do.
And then spend extended amounts of time really networking in places like Brazil or India and applying for the right license at the right time. And at that time, governments were really interested in including the population in various systems like the credit bureaus, the banking system, the payment system. So India is like rolling out this global payment system, countrywide payment system called UPI, and they want to sign up, over 1 billion Indians to this system. So companies like mine were seen as helpful to that mission because we can make a lot of small $5 loans and then pay people over their payment system to include them in that. But I wasn't necessarily doing it because it was trendy. I was just doing it because that's what I started doing at Kiva and I wanted to continue. And it was like part of my own story. But I think I got lucky with regard to the timing.
Got it.
I was able to get a lot of financial licenses and banking licenses that nowadays are probably a lot harder to get.
Yeah, that gives you a real kind of incumbents advantage now in a few of these markets. I'm interested in how Branch, as a for-profit entity, is able to serve customers in different ways than Kiva is able to, and vice versa. Like, what is it that Branch is able to do, and why did you incorporate it the way that you did versus the nonprofit that Kiva started at?
At Kiva, I think I sort of ran into a wall. It was able to grow really fast under me as a CEO for for 7, 8, 10 years. But towards the end there, I was just unable to grow it any further. And I think the problem was we were trying to raise money over the internet from the general public at 0%. And then, in the early days, I was on Oprah, and Bill Clinton's talking about this everywhere he goes. And we had all these beautiful sort of PR bounces. And that's going to take a long time, because although banks might like it, you just wake up in the morning and some amazing newspaper or magazine article comes out, and then there's tens of millions of dollars coming into the website. But I think after 10 years, you're no longer new, and it's hard to figure out a new way to raise millions more dollars every year on the internet through crowdfunding. So I was sort of interested in getting away from the crowdfunding aspect, the internet-focused masses aspect, because I wasn't as excited about that as actually just serving the customer. What I was trying to do in the first place is serve a customer, a small business person in emerging markets. So being a for-profit allowed me to raise money. I think I raised $100 million within a few years, and deploy that in a customer-facing way without having to worry about the fundraising aspect on the internet.
And you're able to lend to people who don't have a traditional FICO score or the local equivalent thereof. You make very quick lending decisions based on the data that's on their phone. How are you able to do that?
So when we first decided to make this a mobile app, and it was pretty early, like 2014, we realized we could get all this data with consent from our users about how they use their phone. So what apps they have, their GPS location, what receipts they get when they, buy food at the grocery store, et cetera, and share it with us and ask them questions as well. And with that, you can sort of reverse engineer a FICO score using machine learning. So we started doing that in 2015 in Kenya, and then we shifted to other countries like Tanzania, Nigeria, and India. Yeah, and it works really well. The thing is, you're able to lend $10, $20, $50 to people that aren't in the credit bureau and aren't really served by banks, especially with credit. We're a full-service digital bank in the countries where we work. So that means we offer small loans, large loans, but also savings products and investments products. So it's amazing how we can democratize savings with a fully digital presence. You can give people the ability to, invest $5 in the stock market, which is really, really cool, part of our mission. So once you divide these financial services, which have traditionally been for the rich, into small fragments, and you don't have a lot of brick and mortar costs, you can really serve lower income people the same way that formerly wealthy people were served.
Yeah. The irony being of the you don't have brick and mortar is you name the company Branch, which makes me think of a bank branch. I think it has a different lineage. Can you share more on the name of the company?
Yeah, well, it's I guess double meaning. At the time, I was not working at Kiva, and I took a year off, and I was playing around with a lot of stuff, learned a lot about AI, machine learning at the time. And so I was trying to do underwriting in the emerging markets without credit bureaus. So looking at all sorts of unstructured data. And at the time, the algorithm I was using was called random forest. So I was just picturing branches of trees and then thinking of branches of a bank at the same time, and thinking that we're trying to be branchless. I named it branchless at that time, but it's not a very good name. Branchless is a little negative. It basically says what you don't have.
Right.
So then I just shortened it to branch.
What's the sort of data that you look at? What are some of the biggest challenges that you faced as you proved that this system worked and people would repay?
Well, there's so many challenges. I'd say one is fraud. So if you're just deciding to lend to everyone that downloads your app in Nigeria, most people are really well-intentioned, but you can face situations where groups of people get together and try to defraud you all at once. And so one thing I learned about fraud is it's really not linear. It's like you can have no fraud for months at a time or years at a time. And then over the weekend, you can have monumental amounts of fraud if they find a loophole in your system. So you have to be really, really vigilant. So fraud, it probably is the number one challenge to making this work. It's a constant battle and it never ends.
Without revealing too much, so fraudsters learn too much, what are some of the key data points that you look at to understand if someone is going to be creditworthy or not?
A lot of it has to do with, first of all, the receipts that they get while using their phone. So if you're in India and you go to a market, Oftentimes they'll send you an OTP that says, do you want to purchase something at this market? If you buy gas, you'll get a receipt. And then we ask our users to share their commercial receipts with us. And so adding that up, you can sort of build a ledger of someone's financial life and learn a lot about them. And now it's not people learning about them. It's an algorithm learning about them that recognizes patterns and says $50, $100 would be the appropriate size of a loan to give this person based on their spending habits. Also, like there are certain apps, like if you use a ride sharing app, that might mean you're able to pay back a small loan. So different things like that. And then you can assemble a graph of users in a country based on their contact lists. And that can form sort of a trust network that we can use to know that people are real and people, are who they say they are.
Yeah. Can you paint a picture for us of who is a typical person that downloads the app and is looking for a loan, and what's sort of their experience look like?
Yeah. So our biggest market is in India. So I'm tempted to talk a lot about that. We're lending to people all across the country in big cities and in very rural places. The typical user would be a small business owner that needs supplies for their shop. And banks won't give that type of person a loan because they're not in a credit bureau and it's not worth their time. But with Branch and other services like this, we're able to understand who you are really, really fast, even though you're not in the credit bureau, and make a quick loan within minutes to you, right at the point of where you need it most, like at a gas station or at a market where you need to buy stuff.
Are there particular product improvements that made an outsized difference in customer adoption?
Getting good at approving a lot of people is really, really important. So if you look at our app, I think we're the 20th most popular financial app in India right now. And in contrast to some of our competitors that are spending $10, $15, $20 per customer, where we spend zero on marketing. So what we really did was kind of by accident, I started doing this in Kenya, Nigeria, where you couldn't really rely on any credit bureau whatsoever to tell you anything about a customer. So we really had to get good at accepting customers at really small amounts, like $2 at a time, and serving them, and then taking it from there. Whereas in India, there are some credit bureaus and other like banks, neobanks in the space were relying on things like credit scores and pay stubs, salary slips to accept their borrowers, whereas we didn't know how to do that. We had no background doing that. So when we started working in India in 2019, we just started doing the same thing there that we were doing in Kenya, which is just accepting a high percentage of people with $2 loans. And then what that did was create this marketing flywheel where you get really, really high in the organic search rank in Google Play, and then people tell their friends, and then it's just like a virtuous cycle. So I'm pretty sure we lend to more people every day in India than any other company, I think in history, because we started in Africa where there were no credit bureaus.
Yeah. And I know you also you launched in Mexico and you learned a lot there. You're not in Mexico today. I'd love to hear the story of what you learned in Mexico and how it helped you when you launched in India.
Yeah. I spent about 2 years trying to work in Mexico, living in Mexico City off and on for about 2 years. And after that, we just decided one day, this was right before COVID, I didn't know COVID was happening, that it wasn't worth trying anymore. It was an uphill battle. I mean, what really happened was everyone defaulted. All of our customers default. I know that doesn't happen in the country at large, but over Android, in our company, almost every user just defaulted. Why was that? I think, number one, the payment rails are really, really bad. So when you're lending to low-income people in Mexico, there's really no like M-Pesa mobile money system like there is in Kenya, or there's no UPI, Unified Payment Interface system like there is in India. Basically no PayPal-like system that works for the general public. So what we did was we partnered with a convenience store like the equivalent of 7-Eleven. It's called OXXO. And we had all of our customers go to the convenience store to get the loan and then go back to repay the loan. I think what we found is there's so many ways that can go wrong and that it's so difficult to repay that it was just really, really hard to have a decent repayment rate.
Sounds like you could even just have an issue with like a customer's, like their truck breaks down. They just can't even get to the store.
Yeah. Just the inconvenience. I mean, you're asking them to pay you, which they don't want to do anyway, And then to do that, you have to travel somewhere. That introduces a lot of friction. Also, I'd just say in Mexico, outside of Mexico City, there's just a lot of lawlessness, as we might know. And so the idea of a rule of law, or a sense in the public that, this is your responsibility to pay back this loan, it's just not a high culture of following rules or paying back your loans for whatever it's worth.
How did that inform your launch, your very successful launch in India?
Yeah, India was right around the same time. And you just could see from day one, it was going to work a lot better. I mean, when you start lending somewhere, you make thousands of loans to everyone that applies. So you have a truly random sample. And then you watch the repayments come in, and maybe your repayment rate is 60%, 70%. In India, even when we did that, it was like 100% or nearly 100%. So just the average customer in India is so much more likely to feel responsible to paying back their loan than the average customer in Mexico for reasons well beyond my control.
Tell me more about the machine learning model. And in particular, I'm interested in how any changes you're making right now in the sort of dawn of generative AI.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm spending my time on the last year. We made a lot of progress. So there's a lot of work that data scientists do on the back end and data engineers do on the back end that can be automated using generative AI. We call it generative credit. And so we're piece by piece replacing processes that we, performed in years past with data scientists tinkering and looking through the needle in the haystack in unstructured data, creating a regular expression for that needle, and then detecting it and calling it like a data point or a feature. Now you're able to sort of say kind of more semantic level questions. Hey, does this person buy groceries? Ask big questions like that to an LLM. Feed the receipts. So a user might share a bunch of receipts from the past week with the app. And then you could, in India, create a list of every grocery store and then match that against the receipts. But that list is always changing, and the receipts themselves change. Grocery stores change their format. And then there's a small market in a second tier city that's not on our list. So with generative AI, sort of like you would ask, you'd feed a huge piece of text and say, analyze this text. You can do that with receipts and get into bigger questions like, does this person have other loans? Does this person pay for gas? Does this person have receipts? The answers to those questions proved to be very predictive in terms of will they repay their loan? What size of a loan should we issue them? So our default rate's just gotten so much better. Also, our back-end processes are so much more efficient now that we have these models. I'm thinking of ways to go further with this. And I think there's so many cool ways. Lending is essentially about predicting the future. And you can ask generative AI to predict the future. Now, it might be wrong, but you can ask it based on the past, based on this series of data, like financial data from the past, what's going to happen next? Yeah. Or could you generate receipts in the future for you? And what's your spending pattern going to be like in December 2025? And it'll tell you something. I'm not sure how accurate it is. It's going to take quite a while to evaluate that. We call that synthetic data or future synthetic data, training a model on your behavior in the future, which is kind of a wild idea.
That is a wild idea. You're training a model on, you've made a model of how I may behave in the future. Yeah. And then you wait and see how I actually behave. And that's how you verify if it works. Am I getting this sort of right?
Yeah. And in lending, it's going to take a long time because it's like a winery. I would say you can't speed up a winery. Right. You have to let the vintages mature. So you might start on Cabernet 2024, but you don't know if that stuff is good for quite a long time. So yeah, these are the kind of things you do when you're a lender. You have to plant seeds. You have to wait for them to harvest, and you might spend a few years just waiting, which is sometimes maddening.
But you're also using generative AI. Like people think of generative AI and they often think of help me write an email, help me write a poem. But you're taking it and you're taking unstructured data and turning it into structured data, which is I think a very, very, very effective use of it that doesn't get as
Yeah.
much attention as the amazing, like, oh my God, it wrote, a bunch of cogent paragraphs.
Yeah. Well, I think kids in college have figured this out. Instead of reading War and Peace, I'm sure some of them don't get any ideas, are just asking ChatGPT to summarize it. And so it's kind of the same. It's like there's so much digital footprints from users in the developing world. Making sense of it takes a lot of analysis. And so we have people doing the analysis at first and coming up with ideas and then testing the ideas, but you can do that a lot more accurately and a lot more quickly with these new models.
Yeah. How do you address issues or potential issues of bias as you're training these models?
Yeah. Well, one of the breakthroughs I've had is I realized that humans are bad at credit scoring other humans. That is the basic premise of this company that I learned at Kiva, and in the very beginning of this company that rang true. I had at the very beginning very manual credit models, have humans analyze someone else's financial data, ask users questions, have those questions be answered, and then put that into a decision. And then we compared that with a machine learning model. And most of the humans were really, really bad. And we had some humans which are outliers, which did an amazing job. And so you sort of wonder like what this person was doing and can we replicate that in AI? But in general, humans are much worse at this the cool thing about lending is it's kind of a binary outcome. It's like either people repay or they default. And that really simple difference is a really appealing domain-specific problem for AI. And the cool thing about AI, it comes in with no assumptions. And we only train it on our own users and a random sampling of randomly accepted users. So I think the thing you have to do is every day you have to accept a random group of people, completely random from your applicant pool. And then you have to compare that control group versus the treatment group. And if you can learn from the control group and take those learnings and bring them back into your everyday production environment. I think the thing that would be tricky is if you just trained a model based on people you had previously accepted. That's how you get into areas of bias. So if I'm learning only from the group of people that I already serve, you're going to do a bad job of done that. And the people you already serve are doing a great job. And if you train a model on that, the model becomes so optimistic about the world that it'll start accepting everyone. And that's really bad.
That's fascinating that you give money randomly to some people just because you need to learn. Do we have a self-selection problem here?
Yeah, and that's the way to overcome bias is you have to serve people randomly with no judgment every day with a totally beginner's mind. And you have to learn from that group. We probably make hundreds of loans every day to people we know nothing about based on zero criteria.
What's the expected loss rate on that random sample? I'm curious actually how you measure if you're, where you're at.
Yeah, we call that the natural loss rate. Different countries, I think you can find this out and that'll give you a pretty good indicator of whether it's going to be easy or hard to work in a particular region. I would say in a hard to work country, that would be like 60%. In a country that's more developed in its credit culture, that might be 90%.
Mm-hmm. How many standard deviations of difference are there between the natural loss rate and what you've optimized for in the countries where you're live?
To make it work, you've got to have something like a 95% repayment rate. Otherwise, if you have an 80% repayment rate or something, you're going to have to charge 30%, on a $100 loan to make up your losses. And then that's just a really bad business.
Yeah. What's next for Branch?
Yeah, we're working on a thing called Branch Pro in India, especially. So we made our mark in India and giving really, really small microloans, like $50, $100. But as we grow, we need to diversify to other types of lending products to reduce the risk or at least the perceived risk. So we're working on large loans to salaried employees, like $1,000, $5,000 loans using the same technology underneath. And the big question is, will AI work at that level? And so that's what we're learning about.
Are you looking at additional markets as well?
Right now, we're just focused primarily on the countries we work in. If you think about a company like this, I think it would work really well in other places like Brazil, Egypt, Indonesia, the Philippines. But we have a lot of work to do. And so we're just focused on the places where we work right now.
I love exploring how people's past experiences make them great at what they do in ways that they never saw coming. You were in a rock band with Jeevan Kalanithi. He's the CEO of Open Space. He was guest number 3 on Crafted. And I would just love to know, how did being in a rock band with Jeevan help you become a CEO?
I think I became less shy. I'm an introvert. I don't like public speaking. But I had this situation where in a rock band, I had to perform in random clubs. I had to tell jokes. Our band was trying to be funny, trying to be stupid. So I just had to make fun of myself on stage in barbecues and random venues around the Bay Area in California. And then a few years later, I found myself having to be a public speaker, be on talk shows like Oprah Winfrey Show. And I just think it gave me a little taste of trying to come out of my shell a little bit and just realizing that you just got to try to be yourself in all moments and not be proud.
That's amazing. Matt, thank you so much.
Yeah, nice to talking to you.
Crafted is brought to you in partnership with Docker, which helps developers build, share, run, and verify applications anywhere without environment confirmation or management. More than 20 million developers worldwide use Docker's suite of development tools, services, and automations to accelerate the delivery of secure applications. Learn more at docker.com. Special thanks to Artium, where I launched Crafted to see how Artium could help you build your future at artium.ai. And Crafted is produced by Modern Product Minds, where my team and I can help you take a new product from 0 to 1 and beyond. We specialize in early-stage product discovery, growth, and experimentation. Learn more and sign up for the Crafted newsletter at modernproductminds.com. Please share Crafted with a friend or really anyone.
You have to serve people randomly with no judgment.